What's going on? It's Live Well Check. Today, I'm going to tell a story about a tournament that I fished when I was in. It was a club that I founded. I was fishing out of a john boat in a small river attached to Lake Erie. There was a few other guys that fished out of john boats, and there were a lot of guys that fished out of bass boats. A couple of the guys actually that fished in this specific tournament, one of them was one of the guys to first be a part of the NPFL, National Professional Fishermen's League. And another guy, not at this exact time, but this would have been years after, had qualified for the elites. So, pretty stiff competition. These are people I knew through working at Bass Pro Shops and rubbing shoulders with throughout the time of fishing in northern Ohio, southern Michigan on the tournament scene. You know, finding them at fishing expos and different stuff and just basically chopping it up with them, talking fishing, let's talk fishing. That's what we do. And we would talk fishing. So these guys, I mean, there were some guys that were still learning, and there were some guys that were some really good sticks and everything in between. You know, retired dudes that were fishing the Red Man back when that was in its heyday, and now they just do little buddy club tournaments. So we were fishing in a river attached to Lake Erie. Now, to preface this club was all about development, and it was all about making sure that we were fishermen fishing around other fishermen, right? These aren't cutthroat dudes. These are guys just going out there trying to catch some fish. So to start it off, I did practice for this tournament. Me and another guy in a john boat, we went together, and we decided that, okay, so the boat launch is on the inside of an island just downstream from the dam. So you have a dam, then you have the boat launch. This island was here, and there was a canal that went out to the main river. You could only go down the canal towards downriver along this island, and it was, I would say, almost a quarter mile to a half mile long, roughly. And you couldn't go upstream because it got real shallow. I think what they did is they put in a bunch of rocks and boulders and stuff like that to keep people from going upstream right away. You had to go downstream. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe in the 70s or something, it was an old, because some people seem like they maybe would swim there. It looks like an old beach area, but it's overgrown and stuff now. It's not a beach area. It's not developed. No trash cans, stuff like that. So I'm wondering if maybe that was it. I have no idea. There is a pedestrian walkway where you can go to the island. So chances are it probably was developed, you know, in the 70s or 80s, maybe even 90s. But now it was just full of boulders, rocks, and sediment. And it wasn't stuff that washed down from the river. It was put there intentionally, you can tell. So I could take my john boat up there because it only drew, 4 inches of water, but you couldn't take a bass boat up there. Well, so me and this guy, basically, we launched our john boats at the same time, and what we would do is we were fishing together, so we were working together. Now this is about, I would say this is 2 weeks or so, or a week before the tournament. In that club, and a lot of clubs around here that I fish, you're not allowed to pre-fish any closer to the tournament than the Sunday before the tournament. So you can't go any of the weekdays, or if it's a Sunday tournament, you can't do Saturday before the Sunday, anything like that. It has to be, it's between a 6 and 8 day layoff. So if it's a Thursday tournament, that Sunday's the cutoff, is what I'm getting at. If it's a Sunday tournament, Sunday's cutoff, previous. So we were up there, I think, a week or two before, middle of the summer. This is a very shallow river. It's not known to really produce any type of good fishing after springtime. Now in the fall time, it's known again, and I know that rivers and streams, creeks and stuff like that can be really productive in the spring and in the fall, but this is midsummer, right? So what we did is we just kind of fished either side of the canal on the way down. We didn't go up the river. We decided to work down the river because we're in john boats. We were trying to see about how far we could get down, how long it would take, And then we only have trolling motors. We didn't have gas motors because we both fished in another club that didn't allow gas motors and a lot of bodies of water that didn't allow gas motors. So we pretty much just always stayed with the trolling motor, and that's all we did. I had mine hooked up on the front with a momentary switch, and had a little cooler live well, stuff like that. So it was really cool. It was a really cool experience, and it teaches you a lot fishing out of a small boat like that. So we went down. We got on the bottom side of this island where then it widens up, and he went all the way across. Now we were talking, and we made sure we had each other's number and stuff like that. And he said, I'm going to go to the other side. I'm going to flip docks. I'm not against a dock pattern. I'm not really for docks. I like to fish grass and gravel bars and rock piles. And I don't know this river. There's really not good contour lines. I've actually never fished this river by myself. I had done a milk run with a couple of guys before in a previous tournament, a buddy tournament, where we immediately went down to one spot, fished it a little bit, went to another spot, fished it a little bit, and then went out to lake area and fished for smallmouth and stuff. So that's kind of what we would do. So my buddy Kyle, he went across the river to fish docks, and we were sharing with each other what we found, and we were agreeing to, if we found something apart from one another, we might share it with each other, but we would stay away from those areas, right? That's just what good dudes do when they're working together and they're trying to figure out a pattern. So I went on the south side of that island, and here's my little makeshift map. So you have this is the island, and this is the boat launch where you launch into the canal. This is a pedestrian walkway, and you really couldn't turn this way unless you had a john boat, which we did at this point in time. So we went down here. Now my buddy went all the way across here and started working back up towards the dam. Well, when he did that, I figured, well, if he's going to work that way, I'll work up the island and, kind of fish that. And I wanted to see what the outside of the island, because the inside of the island, that canal, has very good depth, has clear water, there's a little bit of current, and it's, I would say, between 7 and 9 foot deep. Now, when we were fishing down it, we did catch some fish, but not a one of them was a bass. We were flipping, spinnerbait, he likes to throw a jerkbait a little bit. I was throwing a crankbait, and we were just doing some different things. I was mainly flipping and throwing a spinnerbait. I caught a catfish. I think he caught a crappie. So there was we could tell there was fish in there, but neither one of us had a bite from what we would even think is a largemouth, and anything that we caught was not a largemouth or a smallmouth. You get down to the bottom of that island, you got down here, and it was overgrown. It was very overgrown. So you had deep water, so that canal cut in close to the bank, and you had some overgrown bushes, briar patches, like all sorts of stuff, like vines, because there was an old seawall. It was wooden, and stuff just overgrew. So I'm flipping a jig, I'm skipping it back in there, it's going back in there way deep, and it's falling down, and I could not get a bite. I think at some point in time that could be the deal, and I'll tell you more about that here in a little bit, but I didn't get any bites. And when you're practice fishing, you're really trying to find what water looks like, what looks good, even if you don't catch fish, in my personal opinion, because on tournament day, if I find something that works, and even though it didn't produce in practice, maybe they're on that now. A week has changed. A lot of different stuff can happen. But lo and behold, what I do is I try to identify, this is where the creek channel gets close to the bank. This is where it's overgrown. This is where I have deadheads. This is where I found some rocks. This is where I found grass. And typically fish will hang out on all that stuff. But when they're really, really focused on hanging out in the grass, then, you should memorize where some of these other spots are. It doesn't mean you can go back and they're going to be there. But it does mean that if you're starting to fish through an area and you find a bunch of grass patches that have largemouth or smallmouth in them, but you fish some of that stuff in practice and some of it didn't produce, but now some of it is, if you're trying to recycle back through the stuff that was productive, it's not a bad idea to go hit up a little bit of that smaller area of grass that didn't have fish, because fish might have moved in there, something might have changed. Could be current, wind, weather conditions, the minnows are pushed in there, who knows, right? But they will move around. So I fished that other side of the island, that whole other side of the island, and there was a lot of deadheads, there was a lot of stumps, there were some branches, just fallen trees, and it was really shallow, and there wasn't much depth close to it. There was little patches of grass. I didn't get one bite, not one bite. And that's river fishing. That's Midwest river fishing, unless you're on like a major river that's super, super productive. I'm like, okay, well, it all looks fishy, but it's not producing. And this is early in the practice. I got up here, so when I fish down around the bottom, and there's grass down here, I know I wrote that down, the grass. I did throw some stuff in there. I caught some really small largemouth in there. Fishing a spinnerbait, jig, stuff like that, and it was hard to fish, but there's current washing through there, and there was grass. Very productive. I think that could be like a spot. So I kind of marked that in my head. Well, I went up here, and when I got to the top here, there was a lot of grass, to the point where up towards the bank, I couldn't tell how deep it was. It was matted over, right? And there was nice, not super thick, but there was good amount of current, and there was good green grass. And I said, man, this looks really good. And on the bank was a little bit different. It was probably where they put that barrier to keep people from driving a boat up that way, is there were a lot of rocks. And they were about softball to volleyball or soccer ball size, and there was rocks around the bank underneath that walkway, and I was really getting a look at it, and it looked awesome. So I kept my boat out away from it. I kept my boat in probably, there was about 10 to 12 foot of water there, and I started throwing a worm around because there was a lot of grass. I wanted to throw a spinnerbait, but I couldn't get the spinnerbait through it because it was just underneath the surface, and if I threw it up there and I started reeling it, I didn't want to start pulling weeds and doing all that. So even though I was trying to fish quickly and eliminate water, find water, get a bite, I was also trying to be smart about where and what I was fishing. And I thought, well, I'll just take a big worm. And here's the thing, is we're fishing in the middle of summer, and that's kind of the reason that I grabbed some of these baits. Is when I talk about baits, there's reasons for me a lot of times, and I'm not, this isn't gospel, this isn't what people should just automatically hold on to, but I will say that I had some options, and a lot of guys are going to fish, some of this very old school. I grabbed this one on purpose. There's our guy, KVD, right? He's like 20 years old in this picture. I don't even think Strike King makes stuff like this anymore, but this, this is a real typical style worm that guys will use on rivers in the summer. Doesn't really have a scent, but that's Strike King was using this Elastec type material. What did they call it? Yeah, Elastec. Yeah, I think they're still doing some of the stuff with that, but so I thought that was a really cool color too. I can't even tell what the color is, but I wasn't throwing that, and there was a reason. I also want to show that this is another worm that wouldn't be a bad idea to throw that time of year. That's your traditional that's a curly tail worm, right? Right? That's like a U-tail worm that's really old school, and it's a little smaller. Now that is a river killer. That is a river killer if you're talking about river worms. But when we're fishing in the middle of the summer, I think the exact worm I was throwing, it's up here, was this. So you can see the difference, right? And you wouldn't think it makes a difference. Maybe sometimes it doesn't. But when it does, it does. And you see these colors? This river goes from really dingy to extremely clear in a matter of seconds upriver because of the grass patches. Now, traditionally it's pretty dingy water, right? It's got 8 inches to maybe a foot clarity. It's dingy, right? It's not tannic. It's not muddy. It's got some color to it. It's washing sediment down. It's got the dam. Dam stirs up stuff. It does have a hard bottom. It's not muddy, but it has a lot of sediment in it. And it does have a lot of trees and everything around it, so it has some old leaves and sticks and stuff like that, so there's a lot of sediment in this water. So I was using a darker color. I was using this exact worm, size and everything. And look at the size here. Look at the size, right? You have your ribbon tail and your traditional curly tail, okay? Doesn't look like it makes much of a difference. This is a little more slender profile, has a little bit of vibration. Color is, it's similar enough. The color, I don't know that would have even made a difference. But your main thing is this long ribbon tail throws out some vibration, and when they can see it, it has a lot of action. It's a little bit bulky compared to this, right? This is a good worm, not only to get bites, but you can also catch some good sized fish on. So I was throwing this around. I also had a jig. I usually have 2 types of flipping baits. And I had started off the day a little bit with like a creature bait, a jig, but I was trying to get bites. So if you're really trying to get bites, a Texas rig plastic is the best. And I do like, and I think it was Greg Hackney talked a lot about this, but before I fished jigs a lot, obviously I had this on for practice fishing. But as I started fishing jigs more, I would use these for practice fishing to get bites, figure out about how many fish I felt were in an area compared to size. I could go back on tournament day, I could have a good idea of what the fish were doing, where they were located, the numbers and the size of fish, and I could use a jig to get those better bites. So there is that. But this was the exact bait. I took that bait, about a 1/4 ounce weight. You could see current pushing the weeds. There's some rocks built up, and you had that canal. So as I'm sitting in the boat, I'm sitting in my John boat up here, I was facing this canal, right? And the current's washing down. So I was facing the canal right over here by my pinky. And I could see it build up, and I cast out there in front of this weed bed. It was a little deeper, like I said, about 8 foot, 7 foot, and I start working it, and I feel a thump. I reel down, I lift up, he's still there, and I was like, I gotta see the size of one. A good friend of mine taught me that too. If you have an area where you're getting bites, you don't want to go back and fish an area that has a bunch of 10 and 12 inchers. We're attached to Erie. There's guys in this tournament I know are going out to Erie, and they're going to catch smallmouth. They're going to at least catch a few. So I've got to try to find better than average fish, right? I got to find fish in the 15, 16 to 18, 19 range. Well, I set the hook. Could tell it was a good fish. Didn't know exactly what it was. Got it up to the side of the boat. Netted it. This fish is about a 4-pounder. It's about a 4-pound largemouth, and I'm like, okay, it got my attention, right? The thing was, as I was bringing this fish up, there were fish following him. There were bass following him. And I wouldn't say that they were all smaller than him. It looked like a wolf pack about all the same size, none smaller significantly. If anything, maybe a little bigger. obviously a little smaller, but I seen at least one that I was like, that's a good fish, right? So right away, it tells me there is a pack, a squad of largemouth here. The current's washing in, got grass, rocks, everything's set up perfect. You have this old beach area a little bit off to my right. Like I said, I'm facing down current, and I wasn't necessarily pulling it up current, right? I wasn't worried about that. I just didn't want to take my boat into the area I felt like was going to be the high percentage area, where there was a bottleneck. You have the top side of that island that's splitting current off like this, and you have the grass right there. There's no grass on the main river side, really, of the island, but there was grass on the right side. You have that rock buildup. So what that told me is that current would go in there. It was probably forming an eddy underneath the water. You could kind of see it too. And there was grass everywhere. So it's literally a buffet line. Those fish can just sit in the grass. They can sit against that rock wall that was put there by, the DNR or whoever, the city builders, and they could let bait, crawdads, gobies, whatever, wash right down from the dam, perch, and they could go eat. That told me a lot just about this area, right? And I wasn't going to sit there and catch fish after fish after fish, which some people do, and that's fine. But I was trying to make sure that I kept the area as fresh as possible. So what I then did is I cast it off to the left. So I'm looking at the island like this. I'm right here. Is I cast more off to this side because there was some grass. Not a ton, because it didn't wrap down around the island. It was just right there on the tip of that island. And I popped it a couple times, got hung up in the weeds, popped it a couple times. Wasn't really trying to work the bait like crazy because I had already seen enough. And I started reeling it in. And as I started reeling it in, there were 3 largemouth that followed that bait up to the boat. And one went to swipe at it, and I just kind of pulled it away. And I said, okay, I've seen enough. I went over to the other side of this channel and started working up this way, where there was some grass and some laydowns and stuff, throwing a spinnerbait. And within the first 10 casts, I had probably caught, I would say, 3 or 4 largemouth between 2 and 3.5 pounds. And I was like, okay. So I did about what any angler that is trying to preserve an area would do. Is I put the rods down, I took the trolling motor, because that was my only way around. I took the trolling motor, and I started moving around the area, just trying to see if I can identify any other little sweet spots. Okay, I had deadheads and rocks mixed with grass. I had an area that this current was washing right out in front, and there was a grass line there, and they were just sitting in that grass line just waiting to eat. And I had caught numbers. And this, I mean, you're talking, this is 50, 60 yards away from where I just seen a pack of like really, really, really nice largemouth. Now to you guys, maybe a 3-4 pounder isn't a giant. But in northern Ohio, southern Michigan, on a river in the middle of the summer, are you kidding me? That's insane. Especially to see a whole group of them. And I got to look at them. I mean, like I said, I netted one, and the other ones were up there trying to steal the bait out of his mouth as I was trying to net him. They, as soon as they seen the net go in the water, they all kind of dipped down and took off. And I didn't stay there long. Like I said, I made one more cast. I popped it a couple times. I reeled it in. There was 3 more. And this is from a different section. This isn't even where I seen that wolf pack take back off towards the canal. So I'm thinking this area is loaded, right? There's grass everywhere. And, even in the main river, not along the island, but in the main river, it would get shallow and deep, and there'd be grass, and there was a hard bottom. So I basically took my trolling motor, moved around, looked for some other little areas. My buddy was fishing across the way, and he had called me and asked if I was going to fish anymore in that part of the river because he wanted to move down. And so I just told him, I said, no, I seen everything I needed to see. And he goes, what'd you find? You know what I mean? And I was like, I'll tell you later. So we wound up just going down the river. And then what I did is I just kind of fish little spots, right? Like I seen stuff that I felt like looked good. I had my 2D sonar. I had an Elite 7 on there. Actually, I couldn't even toggle between screens. I had half GPS, half sonar, right? Just an Elite 7. And I was waypointing some stuff. I would waypoint like grass, right? And that's something else too. Like, you don't have to have really, really nice electronics. Lord knows, if I could afford it, I probably wouldn't put forward-facing sonar on my boat. I'm not going to hate on you if you do. But to me, putting the pieces of the puzzle together and fishing to find fish is exactly why I started getting into competitive fishing in the first place. I'm a baseball player by nature. I coach baseball. This is part of the gear that I coach baseball. But that fire that I had playing baseball, I took into fishing for largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass. We don't have any up here, but you're bass fishing. And on the tournament circuit, gave me a constructive way to take that passion and that energy for competitiveness and challenge myself and go out there and fish for these fish. So what I do when I'm on the water with the GPS is, if I find a patch of grass, right, especially in a lake that doesn't have a lot of grass, I'll waypoint it. If I catch fish in a giant expansive area of grass, because there was some of that up there. Now, I didn't catch any then, right? I got a few bites here and there. Is I would waypoint. So you're in an entire football field of basically patch grass or like grass, lily pads. Waypoint, waypoint, waypoint. And you do that because for some reason those fish are hanging out in that area. Are they following bait? That's not repeatable. But if there's an indentation, if there's a shell bed, maybe a rock pile, a boulder, something you can't see, that water's dingy, it's patchy everywhere, maybe there's reasons for it, but those fish will congregate in those areas throughout the year more often than they will randomly move around, unless everything is absolutely identical. So waypointing those, you can go back and they might not be exactly at that spot where you waypointed, but they'll be somewhere close in conjunction with that. Well, let's just say the tournament practice went pretty well. We fished a long time. I still will never forget that it was, I want to say the heat index had it at 102, and it's very balmy up here. It's very humid. It's an old swamp ground. Yes, we're next to a lake, but it's an old swamp ground, so the soil holds water like crazy, and when it gets hot, it just boils you, right? And we were fishing around for a while, and him and I decided that we were going to fish one side of the river together, go down, and then fish the other side together, and kind of talk about some of the stuff we were seeing, and, you know, just hang out, basically. Fishing in two different boats, small boats, and just fish apart from each other. I actually fished behind him the entire time. There was a guy that owned a little bait shop, live bait shop, right there on the river. He came out with 2 waters, and he said, "You boys look thirsty." I said, "Well, we owe you, sir." And nothing. We're dripping sweat off our elbows. And that was really legit. I mean, we had coolers full of water and stuff, but for him to do that, it was really cool. And for me, over the years, guys will come out and offer you a beer. And even though I don't really drink, especially when I'm fishing or when it's that hot or during competition, I usually take it, throw it in the cooler, right? But it's good after the tournament once in a while. But, you know, that's only if you choose. So that day we fished, like I said, this little just rudimentary map, and the main river, it comes way out here, and then Lake Erie. Okay, there's grass, there's sunken barge, there's all sorts of stuff along this river. Well, what I'm telling you, a couple things I want you to learn from when I get to the main part of what I was trying to cover. You have this, right, compared to this. All right, you have 2 options. Sometimes this is the juice, but I really felt like that day this was going to be better. In that circumstance, and it I feel like it was. The other thing is when you're flipping creature baits, which there's a lot of different creature baits out there, is guys will flip, you know, like some of the, my buddy that was flipping, you know, he had something like this on. I don't think this is not an actual Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver. I think this is a Yum, like a woolly bug. But a lot of guys flip that. But for me, in the middle of the summer, I'm gonna go with something more like this. And you'd say, why does that make a difference? And it does. It really does make a difference. And not even the color. The color is very similar, right? These appendages will actually flutter and create vibration. These are very still. They're natural looking, regardless, but they're very still and unassuming. They don't really vibrate. They shake around, they stick up. But these, as you pull the bait up or it falls, they'll a lot like that. And there's a couple things that there's reasons we can guess. We don't know exactly what's going on underneath the water, but are they feeding on bluegill and, you know, rock bass, minnows? And that look is going to be more like bait fish. Even though this kind of looks like a craw, right? That could be mimicking. I use this a lot when I feel like they're eating bluegill and they're on bigger bait. It's more active visually, vibration-wise, and these are big presentations. So that would be the reason that I would go to something like that. Just hit my camera. Over see the size? Now this can catch good ones too. But we're on Erie. So we already know good ones are around. So we're fishing for good ones and better ones. Or giants. So I'm probably not going to start off with something like this. Unless I feel like they're in a negative mood. These might still go with me. But I'm going to start off with something like this. Same size, but this has the right action I want. Not this. This has the right action. Very similar color. Look, go figure. Very similar action, but look at the size difference. This is going to be more worth the energy that a smallmouth or largemouth is going to expend to eat than this. Now, once again, a lot of times for the summer, I won't even have these with me because if I want to go for fish that are in a negative mood, I'm going to go more for something like this. I'll change size, but I'm going to keep the action very similar because it's not like you're fishing in 35-degree water where this could be a huge player or a smaller version of it. I do have smaller versions of it. You know, if it's real negative, smaller version, right? That's the goal, is getting bit, right? This is good for cold water. This will be better for warm water. Even in a negative mood, then I can go to something like this. It's very similar. So those kind of things will put more fish on the line. They'll encourage more fish to bite. And when you're fishing, whether it's a tournament or fun fishing, these are all things, like if I was just fun fishing and I wasn't preparing for a tournament, I would have sat there and wore them fish out, and it would have been awesome. But I was wanting to replicate that for the tournament day. Well, about a week goes by. We go there. We always had our tournaments on Saturday. So we go. We have, I want to say there's like 10 or 12 boats in it. Right? No team stuff. You can fish out the back of a guy's boat you're in competition with. But this kind of stuff is where we learn more about fishing, whether for fun, tournament fishing, or you can mimic that kind of stuff, you know, fishing with this. And it's funny because all these have very similar colors. Look, right? In the summertime, if I feel like they're in a negative mood, I'm going to use maybe a similar style bait, but smaller, and not just go straight tail. Old power bait. I had a friend that told me, "Hey, can you guys smell that from there?" That's original, like maybe not OG, but that bag of baits right there is older than my son, my youngest son. But these baits that we use, you want to put yourself in a position to catch more fish, and you can do that even when you're fishing with a friend. You know, they're running the boat and all that. All you have to do is just keep some of their principles. Just keep some of the principles in mind. You know, okay, it's warm out, so they might want a little more action. You know, fish are just like humans, and so are bait fish and bluegill and everything. Yeah, if it's rainy and kind of cold out, even for the summer, you know, that could be, what, 45, 55 degrees, 65 degrees, when we're used to 85, 95. That's chilly. Well, right now, outside in Ohio, last I checked, it was 5 degrees. So if all of a sudden it was 55 degrees, those fish are going to be hammering, you know? So it's all about keeping it in perspective. You know, if it's summer fishing and they're active, but they're active because it's summer, but they're inactive because of weather pattern, or, you know, it could be stress from tournaments or something, then you want to know, okay, they're still looking for that action, but maybe smaller. And yeah, the straight tail worms and all that, that's when they really come into play. But, you know, if you're not trying to have 15 different types of baits in your boat, you just want a couple, it's good to just have a few different sizes of stuff you believe in, you know? So those are always factors. Well, like I was saying, week goes by, we have the tournament, and I already know what I'm going to do. As soon as the tournament starts, all these bass boats, they're going down here. My buddy Kyle, he actually ran all the way down the river, and he, because of Google Maps, which is important too, he was going to fish the mouth of the actual river, like to Lake Erie. I was like, cool, you know what I mean? He goes, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to fish this canal a little bit. I was waiting for the guys to clear out, and then I backtracked and I came up here. So that's what I did. As soon as the tournament started, and it's literally like a one-lane road for the bigger bass boats. You know, the first few guys, we were all staged and we're on docks floating around and beached. And, you know, basically we just say, okay, it's 6:15, go. You know, see you back at 3:30. We always tried to fish at least 8 hours. And guys just start filing right on down the line. Boom, 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 boom. You know, you got about, I think there was 3 or 4 John boats in this tournament, if I'm not mistaken. So you had Kyle and a couple other guys and me, and then everybody else had bass boats. You know, Tritons, an old Hydrosport, you know, just a bunch of stuff. And it was cool. Well, they're all filing down, going down river. Most of them are going out to the river or a marina up and around the river, right? So I'm flipping. They're like, you literally fishing in here? And a couple guys are like, yeah, I mean, I've heard of fish going in here, plus any tournaments that are held out of that river, that's the only boat launch. So there's release fish. So they're thinking I'm just, you know, being sneaky. Well, I was, but I didn't want to give up my juice, right? Because honestly, even if I fished down 100 yards in that canal, I couldn't beat a bass boat back up to the top of that island if they felt like I wanted to fish there. So I just was like, yeah, I'm going to try it out in here a little bit. And I did. And I didn't really get any bites. And they clear out, and I can see the last, like, 250, you know, pulling out, you know, kind of and motoring out towards the main river. So I went up and, you know, quietly eased up there. Everything looked almost identical, clear water. But before I drove over it, I threw to it. So I didn't take my boat over that area, even with the trolling motor or anything. I didn't take my boat over that area before I fished it. I didn't get any bites. Okay. I was throwing that worm, same worm I was telling you about. No bites. All right, so I take a spinnerbait and I throw it on either side of that canal where the grass is, because it splits out like that. So I would throw, reel it in front, throw, let it sink, reel it in front, and I'm maneuvering that bait, not just straight reeling. I'm, kind of bouncing a little bit, letting the blades clack, and throwing to the other side where part of it was the beginning of where I caught, I don't know, 3 or 4 2 to 3 pounders within like 15 casts. I don't get a bite. Son of a gun. I've been fishing like 5 minutes. I was like, all right, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fish where I'm going to about take my boat. So if there's any fish there, I don't blow them out. I threw the jig in there a couple times along the rocks. Okay, nothing. Well, I took my boat up to where I had it in practice and made the same exact cast with different baits. Spinnerbait, the worm, tried the jig. Then I started throwing more into, I told you that there were some grass mats. They were matted up right at the mouth of the canal in front of the island. I threw a frog. I had a frog tied on because there was some other stuff in the river that got really thick and I wanted to throw a frog around it. Nothing. And I'm sitting there. I've been fishing for about 15 or 20 minutes. And old sayings, stuff I was taught, stuff I've learned over the years. I've fished rivers a lot. Not that I've fished a bunch of tournaments on rivers or anything, but just fishing rivers a lot. Fish move. They're current fish. They're nomads. There's who knows what they were up there doing. It could have been a once-in-a-lifetime, moment. Maybe I should have just stayed there and wore them out. But it all started kind of coming into my head as a decision-making. Now, when you're in a John boat, it takes forever to go anywhere. The only other spot that I felt like I was getting bites was down around in here. Now, my buddy Kyle that was going to the mouth of Lake Erie and fishing, Milk Run spot all the way down, it was going to take him forever to get down there. But he's already been heading down that way for about 25 minutes. I've been fishing for 15. I messed around the canal for about 10. So, yeah, he's probably got 25, 30 minutes. He's probably already almost out that way. Here I am in my number one area that I feel is going to put me in contention to at least do well. I can't get a bite, which river fishing, and they wouldn't have been in a negative mood at all. There was nothing that was indicative of that. Weather patterns were fairly stable. We didn't get a bunch of rain. We didn't have a cold front come through, anything. It had been fairly stable. Warm weather. The wind remained very, consistent, partly cloudy. That's just Midwest weather. But nothing had really changed over a week. And in my mind, I said, those fish left. So what I did is I pulled my boat out a little ways, sat there for a second, and said I can fish up towards the dam, which I had done a little bit in practice, and caught peanuts, right? Small ones. Those fish could have moved up there too. But I didn't see enough up there that wasn't like picking a fish up here and there. So I moved my boat up. I fished some of that area where I caught a bunch on a spinnerbait, trying to pick up a keeper or two. And I can't remember. I know I didn't get any keepers. I think I got a couple of bites, but they were small. Because I know I ultimately left the area. I spent 15 minutes fishing there and left the area. Now, one of my good friends the friend that was in the first group of people that fished the MPFLs, who was also in this tournament, I told him that I had a spot where I projected if I caught the fish that I seen and I knew what was there, I was going to have between 15 and 17 pounds. That's what I told him. And I felt like that wasn't a fabrication. You know, everything that I seen between 2.5 to 5 pounds was where it needed to be. Just, they didn't stay. I decided, I'm sitting there in my John boat. I know I gotta go somewhere where I didn't really, like, you find backup areas. And I didn't fish them really hard, but I had enough confidence that I could get some keepers, right? And you have to manage your time considerably different in a John boat than you do a bass boat, which taught me a lot too, even when I've teamed up with guys in bass boats. Teaches you to work an area a little more thoroughly, but it also teaches you to use the wind, to not, to avoid the wind, all those kinds of things, and all that stuff's running through my head. And I was like, they're gone. I gotta move on. So I took my trolling motor and I did two things. I left after about 15 to 20 minutes of fishing without a keeper from up here. And instead of coming down through this canal, I went out here. And I did that for two reasons. One, Main River was where I was going to fish. And the other one was, if I took the canal, I was probably going to wind up wanting to stop and fish it. So I was going to spin my tires even more. And what I did, I took off. Got on the trolling motor, just started motoring down, cut it off every now and then, drifted, made a few casts to some isolated patches of grass out there. I was trying to find those fish again. Were they in the canal? I don't know. I knew that I was going to fish that canal on the way back to the boat launch, but there was nothing in that canal as far as success that told me they were going to be there. And to not, drag the story out any more than I have to, I wound up just going down the river and just throwing a spinnerbait. Threw a spinnerbait. And one of the first spots I came to, just before that sunken barge, caught a keeper. It was a good one, about 2.5. Okay. Threw it in my cooler live well. All right. Got one. Fished down a little bit. Now, I'd fished a little bit of that corner where I caught, a fish in practice, and I caught a keeper off it. And I said, I'm going to fish this whole stretch because it all looked very similar. There was a few docks with rocks and hard bottom with some grass and overgrown mixed in. And now that I didn't have a specific area that I was going to just milk and use flipping baits and stuff like that, I was going to have to fish with a moving bait, which is good in rivers too. And I was just going to have to make do. So I caught a keeper. I went down about another 30, 40 yards. I caught a keeper. I said, okay, I got 2 keepers. I've only been on the water for about 40 or 45 minutes. I didn't get any in my main area. I got no size compared to what I seen there, but I got something started. I went down along this barge and everything, right? And there were some people pulling in, pulling out, jet skis and different stuff going out on Erie. So some of that, I wasn't going to get any bites I didn't feel. So I didn't fish around all this movement, people trying to unhook and hook boats up and stuff. So I just wound up going down. I went to this bridge where I did not fish in practice, not once. I put that worm on. I stayed on the up current side and I threw to the piling a little bit. And then I did a Hail Mary. I took my worm with a 3/8 ounce weight, threw it as far as I could alongside that pillar, and it was about 12, 15 foot deep, and I just pulled up once and just felt boom, reeled down, set the hook. It was a good one. Felt like a good one. I didn't know what it was. It's bridge fishing, right? Got it up, and that fish went well over 3. Boom! I was pumped. Yes! And that was only my third keeper. But I had immediately, within the first hour, I had went to my primary area, decided fish ain't here, and if they are, finding them is going to be very difficult because I can't just buzz around. Like, I either have to stay here and make this work, and if it doesn't, I'm donezo, or I'm going to have to bail on it and just go fishing. I wasn't out there, scoping. No hate on it, but I was fishing to find fish. I was fishing areas I felt would hold fish and things that I felt would keep me on the move, catching keepers, so that I could start putting those pieces of the puzzle together that day. And that's what I did. I went down, I caught it all on this side, right? I caught him off that piling. I fished it a little bit, and I know that that's a random fish. I understand that that's a random fish, right? I fished it a little bit longer. I didn't get any bites, and I keep moving, right? Could have just been one there. Who knows? And then I got out in front of this water treatment plant, and it was on, man. It was on. Boom, boom. Filled my limit in about 5 casts as soon as I got past that bridge in front of that water treatment plant. Boom. Oh, I'm culling. Boom. He's the same size as another one. Boom. Dogfish. Boom. Drum. Boom. Crappie. Boom. Calling, boom, calling. Now, they weren't big calls. They were, I was going from 1 3/4 pounds to just under 2. And then I was like, okay, I got one just under 2. I got one just at 2 and one just over 2. And all of a sudden I would catch a 2-pounder. And I'm like, okay, well, this one, now I got 2 at 2. I got one just over 2. And I got 2 around the 3-pound range, right? One close to 4. Okay. Now, before you knew it, I'm 5-6 hours into the day, and it's going to take me 45 minutes to get back up to the boat launch. I'm going against current, trolling motor only. I made lemonade. That's all I did. I fished that stretch. I went to the other side of the river where I had practiced a little bit over here and had some bites. Went over there. I didn't necessarily do anything crazy. I got underneath the bridge on the other side. I tried to duplicate that cast with the big worm on that other piling, that bridge piling. It didn't work. I caught a few keepers over there, but none of them called. And I just fished around. And I went then, once again, back across the river this way and just fished my way up, all the way up through the canal. I think I called one more time. I caught 2 really nice pike at that sunken bridge on the spinnerbait, which was devastating because one of them actually broke the blades off. And then I sat in my boat borrowing blades from another spinnerbait to put on that specific spinnerbait. And it had been through the ringer, but I wanted that specific blade on that specific spinnerbait. I stayed in the area. I threw a different one, just a little different blade combination, right? I threw a different one, didn't catch anything, borrowed a blade from a whole nother spinnerbait, put it on the one I was catching them on, and it was the same exact size and everything, which I was also wanting to use this other spinnerbait, but I was like, well, this one's working. So I just swapped blades and left this one without a blade, and then caught another pike, and then, caught a non-keeper and caught a crappie. What this whole story is about, and I hope that this stuff is informative, I hope it's entertaining, is people talk a lot about how do you know when to stay, how do you know when to go, and there was just something off in the morning. Yeah, I wasn't catching fish. People would say, okay, well, you fished there for 15 minutes, you didn't catch any fish. Well, it's not really that simple, right? Those fish could have moved 50 yards. They could have moved 5 miles. Anything in between. They could have still been there, and I needed to use a whole different combination of bait and technique, which I don't truly believe. Because as soon as I got around other areas where fish were from practice, I I caught them. Same way I caught them in practice. You know, it didn't matter if I was flipping or anything. I didn't really flip that much. I was fishing that spinnerbait real high in the water. I'd throw it out there and I'd fish it real high in the water. Rod tip way up like this, way up. And I was just kind of fluttering that spinnerbait. Just catch them in 3 to 5 foot of water. Fish were there. They were active. They were slamming. Caught pike, crappie, drum. I caught everything. And in that area, when I went up there, they weren't biting. But something fell off. And then as I really started thinking more and more, is that the wind, I believe, was coming out of the west, which was in the same direction as the current. So it created more current on the front side of that island. Was that why they were up there? I have no idea. But while I was fishing, I was like, you know, everything seems about the same. But then as I started thinking back, I'm like, you know, the current wasn't quite the same, because when I was floating around, it wasn't pushing me in the canal quite as quick. And it wasn't as hard to control the boat when I had a fish on. It wasn't crazy with the current, but it was different. And then when we got in, we weighed in, we did everything. This was a long time ago, but I believe I got third behind a guy that had 17 pounds in smallmouth. Another guy had like 16 and a half pounds in smallmouth. And then I wound up weighing, I want to say it was 13 something with my largemouth. And they were like, you caught 13 pounds of largemouth in this river this time of year? My buddy Kyle, he weighed in a couple of smallmouth and stuff. But his weight, you know, he was at like the 10-pound range, which is about minimum for, I don't even know if he caught a limit, but he's a good fisherman. But he went out to try to see if he could sneak in some bigger smallmouth in the mouth of the river. You know, he went for the home run shot. When I told my buddy that fished in the MPFLs, kind of what happened, he goes, was that your spot? You catch them all in your spot? And I said, no. He goes, what happened? I said, well, I fished in the canal a little bit, and then I told him the whole thing, how I fished out in front of the boat so I didn't spook any. I said I didn't get any bites, so I repositioned my boat and fished the weed bed and stuff about the exact same way with the same techniques, used different techniques, jig. You know, tried to throw way up there to see if they had tucked underneath the mats and stuff, fished a frog. I'm like, they weren't there. He's like, so what'd you do? And I was like, I bailed. And he goes, how long did you fish it? And I said, 15 minutes. And he goes, takes a lot of guts. He goes, that move right there was, even though I'm not a veteran tournament guy, I grew up around tournament fishermen, that was a veteran move. You know what I mean? And he was like, dude, that saved your entire day. He said, you didn't sit there and just beat your head against a brick wall. He goes, you might have found them at some point in time. You might never have. And I was like, yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. I just more was in kind of panic mode because I can't go anywhere with just a trolling motor. And he goes, so what'd you do? And I go, I had some other stretches of water that seemed productive, and I just went fishing. Spinnerbait, jig. In that area, I wasn't flipping a worm. I was flipping the pit boss, but I didn't catch anything on a pit boss or a jig. It was all spinnerbait rest of the day. And I probably did catch about 20 or 30 fish. It was a good day. You know, it wound up being a good day. I told him about that big one I caught on the bridge piling, and he said, why'd you fish there? I said, summertime, bridge piling, deep water, current. And he goes, just fishing. And that's what I think the sport is missing sometimes. I think we need to get back to that. Fishing to catch fish, fishing to find an area, to define an area. There's a lot that goes into making sure that we compete, I wouldn't say on a level playing field, but keeping fishing. It's called fishing, not catching. Right? Now, I guess I could have had technology that told me that those fish were gone, or I had technology that told me the fish were still there. But years and years of growing up, walking rivers, fishing from the bank, fishing from john boats, V-bottom tin tubs, no fish finder, all that told me something has changed. Those fish are gone. Go. You're in a river, dingy water, partly cloudy, middle of summer. You're chasing bait fish. Put a spinner bait in your hand. Make sure you have a jig tied on. And other than a couple other baits, like when we got to some like grown mats and stuff like that, where I had a punching rig, I didn't catch another fish on another bait. I fished probably 2 other baits besides a spinner bait and a jig, and caught everything on a spinner bait. And it turned into a really good day. And just like that, you could take a day where I could just beat my head against a brick wall and made the adjustment too late and just ruin my day, or I can salvage my day. You know, because honestly, if those fish stayed around, I'd probably get 3rd place anyway. Because the weights were like 17, 16. I had like 13, I think, 13 or so. And then everybody else was like no limits. They didn't have a limit, had a small limit. So yeah, there was 4 pounds between me and the leader, and there was 3 pounds between me and 2nd place, but there was also 2 to 4 pounds between me and everybody else. So I did something right. And I just read the water. I went fishing. I used what I learned in pre-fishing. I didn't hammer on the spots, and I trusted my instincts. All right, well, hopefully this wasn't real boring. I know I had the rudimentary map, you know, showing some of these old school baits. Some of them are really cool. You know, maybe I should have used one of these big old 10-inch. That's Berkley too. My buddy said it smelled like rotten peanut butter. He always said that. Rest in peace. He's gone. He passed away, unfortunately. He was a good fishing buddy of mine. Grew up with him. But this is just what we do, man. We talk fishing. I'm going to be putting more videos out of just different stuff. Once again, it'll be rigging techniques. Could be some of these just tournament stories. Could be fun fishing stories, funny stories. I try to mix them all in and also show some baits and colors and different things and talk about what I was thinking on the water. I don't have any footage from that day. I didn't really film a whole lot back then. I just stayed focused on the fishing. But I drew you a map, and these lessons are applicable in a lake, they're applicable in a stream, anything that you're doing, any region, right? These are just general things that happen when you're out fishing, especially for bass or anything else. But hey, check it out some other time. We're on other platforms too if you want to follow us. We're just doing simple stuff. Family kind of helps out a little bit, but that's just what we're doing. And I will catch you in the next video.